Kate Falcha, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. I have a very disturbing, disturbing because of injustice, crime case to talk about today. This was suggested to me by Stephen Ridge, the private investigator who came on and talked with us about Jodi Huisentruit. And I think we're going to get together and talk about this case too. I am going to be very careful about making allegations, talking about suspects. I think you'll be able to read between the lines pretty quickly. So I'm just going to tell this story. Now, it was a little difficult to get a lot of information without watching 6 episodes of Dateline and a couple of episodes of Evil Lives Here and true crime TV shows, true crime podcasts. So I collated from a variety of different places, which is why I'm not going to go into any great detail about my sources. All over the internet, all over YouTube, all over television, and all over podcasting. This is a very, I hate to use the word popular, but it's an often discussed case because it's just so frustrating. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the very odd disappearance of a woman named Angela Green in February of, I can't give you a date, and you'll understand why in a minute. We're talking 2019, 2020. You'll understand. She was 51 when last seen. She vanished in 2019 from Prairie Village, Kansas. This is a small town where she lived. I believe they said 22,000, 20,000 population, relatively small place. In February, which is why I thought this would be a good time to talk about it, February 13th of 2020, her older sister, Catherine Guo, sure I'm saying that wrong and I apologize, got a tearful call from her niece, Ellie, 19 years old. Ellie is Angela's only child, her daughter. And crying, Ellie told her Aunt Catherine that Catherine's sister Angela, Ellie's mother, had died from a stroke on July 16th, 2019, months previously. Now, this phone call was made February 13th of 2020. So we're talking, she died in the middle of July of the previous year, August, September, October, November, December, January, February. So almost exactly 6 months later, does her family hear about her death. So this is the story. Angela was married to a man named Jeff, and he told their daughter, Ellie, you have to keep her death a secret. You cannot tell your mother's family that she has died. So Catherine, the sister of Angela, Ellie's aunt, I just try to reinforce the relationships here because I know it's hard when you don't have a face to put on a name. Catherine gets this call from her niece and is told that her sister Angela is dead and has been for 6 months. She can't even process it. She can't really even believe it. Angela was only 51. And to everyone's assumption, she was healthy. She had mental health issues, but they had never actually been diagnosed. She'd struggled for years with anxiety and depression, mood swings back and forth. Now, Catherine, Angela's sister, had a daughter named Michelle. This would be Angela's niece and Ellie, her cousin. And they, Catherine and Michelle, had spoken to Ellie over the past almost 7 months And there was never any hint that there was anything wrong. This is just really stunning, shocking surprise. Angela and Catherine, sisters, were both immigrants from China, but at different times. They had once been extremely close, but they drifted apart, and we'll get into more detail here in a minute, but they drifted apart when Catherine and her family, her small children and her husband, moved to New York State. And their last real serious conversation was in the fall of 2018. Now, 2018, they talk in the fall. Ostensibly, she dies of a stroke July 16th of 2019. And her close sister Catherine doesn't hear about it till February of 2020. So this is our timeline. Catherine did attempt to call Angela in the months between July, when she supposedly died, and Catherine didn't know it, and this conversation with Ellie. And Angela never responded. She never got an answer back. Catherine tended to avoid calls with her sister when her sister was really depressed. So not speaking to her for a length of time was not really a red flag, because Angela went through cycles of not being very social, isolating herself. So Ellie talks to her cousin Michelle, and she tells her that this is how the situation unfolded. In June of 2018, this is when it started to get odd. She said that she left for college. Ellie, left for college, and Angela became an empty nester. Now, Ellie was her only child. Ellie was the center of her universe. She was what did they call that? Tiger mother. She had to be the best at everything according to her mother. She ended up being her valedictorian of her high school when she graduated. She was a good student, but Angela's entire life and focus was this daughter. And it really bothered her that Ellie was leaving the nest, becoming more independent. She didn't like it for a variety of reasons. Now, this is in retrospect. Ellie talks about this, so take this as you will. Ellie knew that her mother didn't want to be left alone in the house. She knew that part of that was she would miss her daughter, the center of her existence for 18 years. But Ellie also thought, maybe she intuited, more than thought, maybe she just knew it, she felt it, that she was a buffer between her mother and father, and that Angela, her mother, did not want to be left alone with her husband, Jeff. It was not really a happy marriage. We don't get a lot of details. I hunted. It was hard to find real specific details. But we'll return to this. Early in 2019, so this is before she had her stroke, Jeff announced that he was retiring from work. And he was going to be home all the time, and I think this might have been what instigated this conversation that he claims he had, that he told Angela that he wanted her to get psychiatric help. She had begun, as 2018 into the fall, Ellie left for college. And around that time, Angela started hoarding, showing symptoms of hoarding. So hoarding is an interesting situation. It's usually, not a psychiatrist, usually regarded as a form of some obsessive compulsive disorder, not obsessive compulsive personality disorder. That's a whole different thing. But an obsessive compulsive neurotic sort of, in this case, maybe we could speculate she was trying to fill a void. Maybe a symptom of insecurity, maybe a symptom of fear, maybe a symptom of a loss. It's often triggered by a death or a divorce or the loss of a job. Interesting. Angela's loss was her daughter going away to school. So this might have been, and this is all speculative, not a psychiatrist yet, all sort of kicked off when her daughter left. So it might have been a reaction to being an empty nester. And this sort of OCD hoarding situation usually goes hand in hand, what they call is comorbid. It has a comorbidity. There's other things going on at the same time, including depression. And Angela was susceptible to depression and anxiety. So now we're into early summer of 2019, May, June. And Ellie had just gotten back from school and had taken a month in Italy when school got out her freshman year. Then she took a month, went to Italy for more school. And Angela wanted her to stay close to home for the summer. We'll talk more about this in a second. But, Ellie had other ideas. She was declaring her independence. And she got back from Italy, and there was a confrontation. And there's a little bit more of a reason for this. We're just going to gloss over the timeline, then we'll go dig deeper. So Angela confronted Ellie. They had a big confrontation, and it culminated in Angela, the first time ever, kicked Ellie out of the house. Now, this is not a troubled teenager. This is not a young woman who's causing any kind of problems. This is just being normal, just wanting independence. But her mother came from a different culture, had issues, had a very strange situation, as we will find out, and lashed out at her and told her, get out, threw things at her, sent her out of the house. So Ellie called up her boyfriend. Luckily, she had someone to turn to, and ultimately ended up staying at her boyfriend's family's home. She never heard from her mother again. And what's really particularly sad about this is, as so many of these cases, is the family is just left grieving indefinitely. And Ellie was a kid. She was 19, and the last conversation she had with her mother was a fight. And, it can happen to all of us. How many times you disagree with loved ones, you don't know if you'll ever see them again. You walk out of the house and who knows what might happen. So she's carrying this burden on top of everything else. This was her last memory of her mother. Her father, Jeff, told her that on the phone, because now she can't come back to the house, that he was looking for a mental health facility to put Angela into. And he eventually tells Ellie that he has tricked her mother, that he told her they were going to the grocery store. They got in the car, they got to the parking lot of the store, and she was ambushed by a couple of mental health people who spirited her away to involuntary commitment. Okay, I hope your red flags are waving in the breeze, because this is untenable. We will return to it. So there are some texts that the police eventually were able to gain access to from Jeff to Ellie. And he tried to explain to her through text what happened. This was very difficult. And one of the significant aspects of this is the communication in the family, or the lack thereof. Anyway, he, in texts, tells his daughter that he arranged to have his wife committed in this fashion, kidnapped basically, because, quote, it was a struggle, but it was better than trying to pry her out of the house. Then he went on at great length. I read this text message exchange. It was unreal. He says to her, well, she always looks good, and she wouldn't want to have been confronted inside the house by doctors or nurses and not look her best, be in house coat or pajamas or something. And she certainly wouldn't have wanted to have them in a messy house, because now she was hoarding. So she wouldn't have, this was a better choice for him to arrange, because then she didn't have embarrassing moments of a house clothes or untidy house. And then nobody else had to know about it. And so nobody else did know about it. He told Ellie, do not tell anyone. Absolutely don't tell your Aunt Catherine or your grandmother or your cousin. Don't tell anybody on your mother's side of the family until, as he put it, I know more about her condition. Okay, so ostensibly, she's just been whisked away. Her daughter's hearing about this for the first time. This would be early summer of 2019. She wanted to see her mother. And she says that to her father, and he says, oh, no, because his explanation is he went to visit his wife in the facility and she got physical with him. So he doesn't want his daughter to be exposed to that. He said, wait until she's stabilized and don't go on your own. Wait for me to go with you. Wait till she's stable. I'll let you know. And then when she asked, he said, well, he couldn't remember where the facility was. Okay, so let's keep a list here. He can't remember where his wife was committed. He did the committing. Ellie never saw her mother again. Never heard from her again. Never saw her again. Then on July 16th, Jeff said, your mother, I just, found out from the facility. They called me. Your mother had a stroke. They found her the next morning. The staff found her in her bed, passed. And he asks Ellie, keep this a secret from the rest of her family. It's just too raw. He said he needed time to emotionally process the situation before anybody else knew. So this went on, the situation, for months. Ellie wanted to know more, wanted to tell the rest of the family, was really stressed out about trying to keep this terrible secret, trying to honor her father's request, but wanting to honor her mother's memory. No, they didn't even have a funeral. Nothing. Just one day her mother is yelling at her. Then her mother's committed and then dead. And every time she tried to drag information out of her father, he would just shut down. She had trouble keeping it a secret. She had no way to grieve. There were no remains. There was no grave or an urn or anything. It was just terrible. So she felt really guilty about lying to her extended family. She was frustrated with her father. So eventually she gave up. She told her aunt and her cousin. So the cousin is the hero in this story. Her cousin Michelle is a lawyer. And as something I read said, maybe Ellie didn't push because she was intimidated or loved her father, or it was a pattern of behavior that they had. But Michelle was a lawyer and she was willing to push. So the first thing she said to Ellie when she heard all of this, after they got over the shock of hearing that Michelle's aunt, Angela, is dead, was, this is far-fetched. And she doesn't believe any of this story. She says that her Aunt Angela could not have been committed this way. And some professionals have weighed in on this, mental health professionals. Now, the rules differ state to state, but in general, we can generalize to a point. Usually, adults cannot be hospitalized against their will unless they're a danger to themselves or others, in which case, depending on the state, it's for a very limited time, like a 72-hour hold. I think California has that kind of an arrangement. But they can get out. Once they feel like they're not a threat, they can get out. Gone are the days of locking people up and throwing away the key. Even more suspicious is the process by which they got her hospitalized. No health professional in the country is going to kidnap you out of a parking lot because your husband thinks you need help. It doesn't work that way. There has to be a paper trail. You have to go to a doctor. You have to get referred to a psychiatrist. You have to have counselors. And most likely, if you're going to try to get some sort of protective situation, custodial situation, you'd have to go to court. You'd need a lawyer. You need a guardian ad litem. I mean, it's very complicated, and that's to protect people from kidnapping, false incarceration. So Michelle's a lawyer. She knows this. She's like, what are you talking about? And she says there are legal concerns. There are ethical concerns. There are safety concerns. They're not going to accost her in a parking lot against her will. And this wasn't an emergency. She wasn't threatening anybody. And we know it wasn't an emergency because Jeff said he made the plan. It was a plan put into place. So this wasn't the correct process in Kansas. This would have been defined as a kidnapping. In Kansas, the proper procedure would have required an extensive paper trail, court hearings, medical screenings, law enforcement would have been involved. So Michelle said, okay, this is what we have to do. Told her cousin, leave your father out of this. We're going to look for the paper trail. So we'll start simple. We'll take the first step. Let's get her death certificate. So Ellie got in touch with vital statistics for the state of Kansas, and there was no death certificate, no record of her death in the entire state. So only 3 things are possible, according to everything that I've read. They said this is what is the most likely scenario. Either she died outside the state. There is a death certificate. It's in one of 49 other states, or Puerto Rico. Or second possibility, she died in Kansas, but nobody ever told law enforcement. Well, that becomes a problem. And then third, she's not dead. So Catherine, the aunt, sister of Angela, calls Jeff, her brother-in-law, on February 15th and leaves a voicemail. And they made a decision together, the aunt, the cousin, and Ellie, that they'd leave Ellie out of this so that she would have an open communication with her father. Still, he wouldn't shut down with her, even worse. So let the aunt and the cousin be the ones to bring this up. Where's Angela? We want to talk to her. So Ellie gets up her courage now because she's got, finally has somebody backing her. She's not feeling guilty. And now she's got emotional support and her cousin, the hero, the lawyer. So on the same day that her aunt calls Jeff, Ellie arranges to meet in person with her father. And he's still saying, oh, well, you know, your mother died in Kansas. And he still says, I have her ashes in the house. And Ellie says, well, yeah, but wait a minute, there's no death certificate. And he says, this is where it gets really weird. Ellie did record some of these phone conversations, and they're absolutely incomprehensible. But he says to her, I need to double check the death part to see where she died. He claims he has a certificate. He just needs to double check that part. And he doesn't know that the rest of the family is now aware that Angela ostensibly is dead. So Ellie finds out that, okay, she's been keeping this big secret from Angela's side of the family. But in the meantime, Jeff's told his whole family that his wife is dead. And Ellie's boyfriend knows. Ellie's boyfriend's family knows. The only people who don't know are Angela's family. And law enforcement and, the coroner, etc. So here's an interesting tidbit. Jeff, before he retired, worked at the federal courthouse. And, he was going to retire in 2019, and he did retire in December of 2019. They threw a big retirement party for him at the courthouse. Ellie went, and while she was there, she made some comments about being sad or puzzled, that her mother wasn't there, because this is before she knows that her mother had a stroke. And he got furious. He lost it. He got so mad at her for bringing it up and talking about it, especially in front of other people. So back to this meeting, the day that Catherine confronted Jeff on the phone, same day Ellie meets her father, and he tells her, well, I have to double check the death certificate. She leaves that meeting with her father, and she's got zero clarity, no answers. So she's kind of being optimistic. She's hoping her father is going to be able to find a death certificate, produce it for her, and mystery solved. Her cousin, Michelle, is fully aware. She knows what's up. And she knows that her Uncle Jeff is just going to play this game and avoid them and not tell them anything. So she calls the Prairie Village police and she explains the situation. Now, keep in mind, she lives in New York, so she's calling Kansas. And she asks them, can you do a welfare check on my aunt's house and see if she's okay? They do. And then they call Michelle back, and here's the story that they tell. They say to her, you have this wrong. You must be confused. Your family from out of town. You must have gotten the story wrong. Your aunt is not dead. We spoke to her husband, Jeff, and he told us that she's completely fine. She's gone away with friends for the long President's Day weekend, and she'll be back on Monday. So Michelle hears this, and she's just in shock. And when Ellie hears it eventually, she's in shock because, first of all, that's not a welfare check. A welfare check, you go to the house and you demand to see the person. They don't have to talk to you. They don't have to interact with you other than to verify their identification. The idea is put eyeballs on the person and verify in the physical world that they're still okay. They didn't do that. They just called up on the phone and took Jeff's word for it. So that didn't make sense. Also, Michelle had told them that, he says she died. He says she died in July. He's telling you she's okay. There's something not right here. And they're just dismissing her, hysterical woman in New York. What does she know? And they're assuming that she's mistaken or there's a family conflict and they want no part of it. They're not at all suspicious of Jeff. Of course not, because he's, So they're not worried about it because he's a middle-aged white man. He has no criminal record. They described him as calm and cooperative. They did go to the house. He let them walk through the house. He even showed them his hunting rifle. So they assumed, okay, this family's just messed up. We don't need to be involved in this. So it seems like this is a pretty serious misunderstanding or miscommunication. And they really, their job is to take these things seriously and to investigate them farther, and they didn't. So the other aspect of the story that Jeff tells the police is that Angela didn't have friends. Her life was very circumcised. It was very limited, isolated. She never went anywhere. She went out in the garden. Her neighbors knew to talk to her across the garden fence. She belonged to no club, no church, no organization. She had no personal close friends. There was a language barrier. She never learned English really well because he didn't let her socialize. But she rarely left the house. She was afraid to drive. She didn't have a bank account. She never would have gone on a weekend away. She didn't have friends to go on a weekend away with. So Michelle tells this to the police, and she says, please talk to her daughter. And that's that conversation. Ellie, when she hears this from her cousin, Michelle, freaks out that Jeff told the cops that Angela was fine and away on a trip, a girls' trip. So the cops do talk to Ellie, and when they see her reaction, they start to pay more attention. They realize, oh, okay, she's not a distant relative. She's communicating one-on-one with her parents. Maybe she knows better. If she's alarmed, maybe we should pay more attention. So, like Angela's own daughter in the same town is thinking that her mother's been dead for 7 months. Her father said so. Her father told her her mother was dead. This is not normal. So Michelle advises the cops, I'm a lawyer and I just think you need to keep your eye on this house. You need to be watching this house because now the red flags are up. what might be hidden, what might be moved around, what might, we're trying not to make aspersions here. We're trying not to point fingers, but it's snowing, it's freezing. She wants them to be on top of it. And she's really angry that they didn't push Jeff enough. So Tuesday, February 18th, Ellie goes to file an official police report, a missing persons report. And in her written report, she explains the whole story about her father telling her that her mother was dead and how his story has changed over time, like how she got gone, how she ended up committed. And she tells him all this. And the other thing that finally happens for the first time is certain things that she had noticed before, but didn't recognize as red flags because she really didn't realize the full import of them at the time, now get documented in this report. In retrospect, they do seem more important. For example, after Angela was committed, you got this big old hoarded house. Jeff went on a cleaning spree with bleach and Clorox wipes, but only in the kitchen and the bathroom. The rest of the house, disaster. At the same time, he asked Ellie to go through her mother's things. Next, mind you, her mother is missing. They don't, is she? I don't think this is before he told her she was dead. Maybe my timeline is a little bit wrong, but the significant thing is he asked her to go through her mother's things. They were getting rid of things. You wouldn't do that if you suspected the person is alive and coming back. So then, and this is the third weird thing, for the first time ever, never before had this happened, he put framed photos of Angela around the house and told his daughter, this is a memorial to your mother. So she's filling out this report at the police station. And while she's there doing that, he calls her on her phone and the police record the phone call. And you can hear it. It's not hard to find. And it is bananas. So here's the new story that he's telling her. I don't think he realizes, she's at the police station. He certainly doesn't know he's being listened to by the cops. He says he gave Angela an ultimatum. You get help. And he went to work. While he was at work, he got a phone call. Angela had checked herself into a mental facility. He can't remember who called him to tell him that. He doesn't remember the name of the hospital. He has no details beyond, I got a random phone call at work, but I was really busy. There was a lot going on at work. I just don't have the details for you. He told Michelle that he got a call that Angela was being, and this is what he's telling Ellie. He told Michelle that he got a call that Angela was being evaluated, that she could not have visitors until the following weekend, and that he planned to go and visit Angela, and that he did eventually go to see her. And when he went, he can't say where he was. He doesn't remember where the hospital was, where he visited her, or how he got there. It was busy. It was crazy at work. This is what his excuse is. So then he got the call from the hospital a matter of days later that she had died. And on the phone, he says, oh my God, it's just crazy. Yeah, it is. So he said, I was so upset I couldn't think straight. So he said, well, let's do a cremation. I don't know what kind of arrangements to make, so we'll do that. Then he got a call. Apparently he instigated, I want to have my wife cremated. Then he got a call back that somebody was coming from the crematorium, the mortuary. He didn't specify. He has very short on details. He got this vague phone call that somebody said, hi, I'll be by the house soon to pick up $1,500 to pay for the cremation in cash. So I'll be there to come pick it up. No name, no identifying job description, no check or receipt. So they came by the house and they offered an urn, I guess, or no, they told him to pick out an urn. So he went online, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Anyway, eventually they got the urn. Eventually the cremation happened. Nobody was there. Family didn't know about it, and he did not attend. And then they returned to the house from the crematorium with the urn with ashes. And all the arrangements and everything, all done by phone. This is back in July. So Ellie starts asking him questions. This poor girl, you hear her voice and you just think, this is more than any 19, 20-year-old should have to deal with. So she says, who came by for the cremation? And her father says, I don't know, a male, about 45, a Caucasian with dark hair. That's all I can remember. I gave him $1,500 cash. And, somehow, short on details, he got an urn to them. And I won't tell you what I wrote here. This is not the process. Let's just put it that way. Where's the paper trail? So none of this makes any kind of sense. So then the story changes again. She committed herself. The story that he told about the grocery store lot, that was a lie. She died and was cremated. The story he told the cops that she was on a weekend trip, that was a lie. Ellie says, but there's no death certificate, Dad. And he says, well, wait a minute now. Maybe I'm not remembering things right. He says, I remember seeing someone who could have been your mother in the neighborhood a few months ago. And sometimes when I come home, I think things have been moved around the house or are missing. Did somebody get into the house? And then Ellie asks, well, where are her ashes? And he said, well, I got the urn back, but I didn't check in the urn. I just took it and put it down. I finally checked it this weekend, and when I opened it up, say it all together, it was empty. Then he tells Ellie, the truth is Angela just disappeared one day while I was at work, and I made up the story to protect you. So he didn't want his daughter to think that her mother ran off and abandoned her, or her mother ran off with, as he put it, ran off with a stranger to do something. So Ellie says, Dad, I want the truth. And he says, the truth is she kind of disappeared. Basically, I just don't know. Angela's family knows that she would not take off with a stranger. I mean, this is just antithetical to who she was as a person. So Ellie wonders, did her mother leave? Did her mother just sneak away because she was so unhappy with her father? You know, that little gaslighting seed of doubt in her head. So what was their relationship like? Well, Angela, her parents set them up as a couple. He lived close to her sister Catherine, and he traveled a lot to China for business. And they met him somehow through the business, and he seemed nice. He was soft-spoken. He and Angela were introduced. They had a long-distance relationship. They wrote a lot of letters, made a lot of phone calls. And finally, Jeff went to Beijing. They had their one and only date. And in July of 1998, Angela, 30 years old at the time, moved to the United States on a K-1 fiance visa, 90-day fiance. So, you got to be careful. That's all I can say. She stayed with her sister. And, this is almost an arranged relationship. She stayed with her sister, but the day of the wedding, she cried and she confessed to her sister that she didn't want to marry him because he was, he lied about his age. He was 46 and he had told her he was in his early 30s. She didn't trust him I'm sure there was more to it than just that, but that was bad. She spoke very little English. He spoke absolutely no Chinese, so there was a huge language barrier. Both of them had tempers, but different kinds of tempers. Angela had a more explosive outward temper. Jeff would simmer quietly, and then he would do something controlling and manipulative. He would scheme like a spider. She would explode like a volcano. And Catherine, her sister, when they very first got married, advised Angela, get your own bank account. But Jeffrey said, no, oh no, you can't have a bank account. You'll be tracked and monitored by the United States government. But he wouldn't give her access to his account, so she had no money of her own. She had to ask him for every penny. So she was very isolated by language, by money, just demographically, geographically. So when the baby was born, she was thrilled. This was the center of her life. Excuse me. But immediately she began to suffer postpartum depression. Now, she was really happy to be pregnant and really happy to have the baby. It was postpartum depression. And then her sister moved to New York, and that was a real blow to her. It was like a lifeline, and she felt betrayed. Ellie, as a child, was very sheltered, smother mother, helicopter mother situation going on. School was the top priority. Her rules were very, very strict. No play dates, no sleeping over, couldn't have a cell phone. She didn't have access to a cell phone until she was a senior in high school. And by then, her mother and father were under the same roof, but living completely separate lives. Angela would slap Ellie and throw things. She once threw a plate at Jeffrey. It hit him on the head and he bled. So, yeah. But mostly their fights were verbal. A lot of yelling back and forth. Jeff wasn't doing as much of the yelling. His mistreatment of his wife was more psychological, more insidious. So Angela's life had revolved around Ellie, and her family said she would never leave her daughter by choice. Ever, ever, ever. It doesn't matter how old she is. She wouldn't leave her. And she was a nervous driver, so she wouldn't just hop in the car and go someplace. And her car was still at home. And her passport, her driver's license, her purse, her wallet, her phone, all still at home. Ellie discovered that over the years, her mother had managed to sock away thousands of dollars by, skimming from grocery money, that kind of thing. And she had it hidden. And Ellie found it. And she thought, well, maybe she had a mental crisis, and she did leave because of that. But that didn't really explain to her all these bizarre stories from her father. So people in the family start getting suspicious. Questions start being asked. And here's where I'm not going to make allegations, but I think if you get 2 + 2, you're not going to get 5. I think you're going to be able to figure out what was going through their minds and what was going through the police minds. Ellie confronted him, and he said, oh, no, I would never do anything. I wanted her to get help. So the Prairie Village Police, led by Sergeant Adam Taylor, decided that it was time to confront Jeff. And when they came to the house, he wouldn't open the door. And then he cracked it open and handed out a business card for his lawyer to the cops. Shut the door. Wouldn't talk to them. So Michelle, the hero, she looks up the name of this attorney on the card. And his name is Paul Cram. And apparently he's a very expensive criminal defense lawyer. And he's considered the best homicide attorney in Kansas. So there is a tiny bit of evidence, maybe, which is Angela's cell phone. And they got excited. Oh, she left her phone. Oh, good. Now we can look at the phone. Except that Jeff started using it immediately the weekend she disappeared. So they can't do anything with it. So she had, as I said, no friends, no social groups. The neighbors thought that she'd moved back to Canada. Canada. Did I say Canada? Oh, I have Canada on the brain. Nate and I have been talking about, tariffs. She moved back to China, the neighbors thought. But another interesting little tidbit, Angela hated traveling. Sounds a little agoraphobic, not diagnosing, just saying, kind of reminds me of somebody who might be dealing with that. And she had never returned to China to visit or deal with her family since she moved. Was it 1998? Never went back to China. So just to be sure, the cops checked with Homeland Security, and she had not used her passport to leave the country. They looked at mental health records. There was nothing. They looked at domestic violence shelters. There was nothing. They looked at death certificates in any state. Nothing. There were no calls on Jeff's phone to or from any hospital. Okay. I'd call that evidence. Bank records show that, yes, he did buy an urn after he claims he was told to buy an urn. He bought an urn. And interestingly enough, it was the very first urn that pops up on Amazon. And when did he buy it? After he told Ellie that her mother had died, 7 months ago. So Michelle is the one who Googled urns, and here it is. It pops up at the very first. So then she Googled the lawyer, and he was the first one that popped up. So Michelle discovered that Jeff actually stole, after Ellie found it, he stole Angela's nest egg to pay the $5,000 retainer for the lawyer. So Ellie confronted him a number of times over the next few weeks about the stories that he had told. And every time she confronted him on the phone, the police listened in. And so contradictory. You can listen to these conversations, and they're just delusional. He made no call to law enforcement about Angela being missing because she'd left before. He said, oh, she's an adult. She's gone away before. So nobody else seems to think she did. Then he says her behavior is so concerning, right? I'm so worried about her. I want to have her committed. But she seems to be gone. Oh, well, no problem. She disappeared. I'm not worried. Even though her purse, her driver's license, her passport, her phone, her car, they're all still there. Not worried. Then he says that she left on her own, and he's not worried. And then he says, I got a call from a stranger that she died. And then he says he was too busy to catch the ID of the caller or where she was, but he wasn't worried. He says, as he puts it on the phone to his daughter, I figured the information would come. So Ellie is confronting him, and she says, your wife is dead. You can excuse yourself from work to call your daughter and let her know. Because his excuse was, oh, it was just crazy at work that day. So she says to him, a stranger doesn't show up at your house randomly and give you an urn and ask for $1,500 cash to cremate your wife. It doesn't happen that way. And if they did, you'd be asking questions, right? Even if you're upset, you would ask questions. I mean, usually when people are in shock about this kind of thing, the question they ask is why, right? So then Ellie says, so by the way, where's her body? No ashes in the urn. Where is her body? So he doesn't seem at all worried about finding his wife. He doesn't seem anxious about her if she's just gone. He's not worried about her mental health anymore. And then what does he do? He turns around and hires a criminal defense attorney specializing in a homicide. So he's resisting everybody else's desire to find her. He says, she left. She didn't want anything to do with us. She's an adult. She's fine. So Ellie asks, come to the police station with your attorney. Let's hash this out. And he got he got real defensive. He says to her, no, you can listen to this. No, he says, you're doing a cross-examination on every phone call and you're twisting things. And I don't like that. It implies, he implies to her, I've always supported you and now you're my daughter. You should support me. And Ellie, says to him, she actually calls him on this. She says to him, you're just not used to me analyzing things this way, asking questions. You're not used to anyone standing up to you or getting upset with you. And she says, this time I have a lot of reasons to feel that way. And he says, you wonder why I don't want to call you and have long conversations? This is why. And she says, my mother is missing. This is the elephant in the room. It's quite a conversation. So she says, I just want to know. I just want to know what happened. And he says, oh, I don't have any answers. So Angela's family thinks that there was an altercation. So Ellie goes, her freshman year, she goes away from home. And as soon as the school year is over, her mother's anticipating she'll be home all summer. And that's not what happened. And this may be the crux of the whole thing. Instead of coming home for the whole summer, she goes away for a month to Italy. Her mother is really not happy. She's very resentful about it because Jeff okayed it behind her back. They didn't let her know that Ellie was going to be gone or that he had given her permission. And they didn't tell her till the very last minute. She was extremely upset and she harbored this resentment and this bitterness and she fumed and it just built up and built up and built up for the whole month that Ellie was gone. This is why there was that fight where she kicked Ellie out. And they used Ellie's phone texts to establish a firm chronology because she couldn't remember exactly what day things happened. This is, a year ago almost. So the cops got Ellie's phone and they looked at the texts and they said, okay, here on the 20th, you and your mother have a fight. This is the day they have the fight. You can tell from the texts back and forth with her boyfriend and everything. And your mother's furious. And Ellie and Jeff usually avoided Angela when she was angry and waited until she cooled off. So this is not the first time that there's been anger. This time, Angela kept raging. This is the difference. She didn't just get over it and it was gone. I think she had a month to fume, like it brings to mind those coal mine fires in I think Pennsylvania, West Virginia, Ohio, somewhere over in that part of the world. There was a fire that happened underground in a coal mine and it's been burning for decades. They had to evacuate villages and cities and just couldn't put it out. This reminds me of that. So Angela's raging, and every time you thought she was calming down, she'd start up and ramp up again. Later, Ellie said this confrontation she had with her mother was like a roller coaster. And Jeff tried to diffuse the whole thing, but it only escalated it because she was really mad at him. So then she kicked Ellie out about 7:30, 7:40, around that time, according to the text messages. Ellie met with her boyfriend. At 8:03, Jeff texted her and said that he had also left the house and he would stay at his brother's who lived close by. Ellie chose not to go home or whatever, not to be with her dad at his brother's house. She decided to stay with her boyfriend, and her boyfriend's family embraced her, let her stay. So it's unknown what happened. Did something happen then? Angela kicks Ellie out. Ellie leaves the house. Was there a confrontation? And then maybe an accident. And then Jeff went to his brother's house. Ellie thinks that her uncle, Jeff's brother, and his wife know more. And the police agree. And this is why they agree. Jeff's sister-in-law, so Jeff's brother, let's just for the sake of clarity call him Joe. So Jeff's brother Joe is married to this woman, Mary. And he goes to their house after Ellie has been kicked out. And when he gets there, he tells them, now this is the same day that Ellie's been kicked out. He tells them Angela's missing. And Mary, the aunt, says Jeff should get a lawyer because an accident might have happened. Okay, this is very suspicious. So the cops interview Joe and Mary. That's not their real names. That's just for clarity. And they only say that Jeff told them that Angela died in her sleep of medical issues. Okay, so now we've got two new different stories to his brother and his wife. He goes over after the altercation between Angela and Ellie, and he tells them, I'm coming over here today. Angela is missing. Then later he says, well, you know, she died in her sleep. This is just crazy. There's no record of it, of course. So Wednesday, March 11th, more than 100 cops, dogs, teams of people, forensic people, search the house. They also search an industrial site about 20 miles away. Jeff has a garage, a storage unit there, a car trailer. They search that. The site is huge, and there's a quarry and a huge pond. There's also a new 30-foot high dirt pile that's been dumped recently from a construction site. So it's a real challenge. They got divers. They did a grid search. They had cadaver dogs. They found nothing. So now keep in mind, it's been months now. On March 11th, she's been missing ostensibly since July of the previous year. So in the house, they don't find anything. They did find a piece of paper that Jeff had tried to remove Angela as a beneficiary on his retirement account, but he couldn't do it because he needed her signature. So in September of that past year, he asked Ellie to forge her mother's signature, and she did. He couldn't prove that she was dead in order to get her off the form because there was no death certificate. They didn't mention what Ellie thought about this. Was this uncomfortable for her? What news story did he tell her about this? So the question is, why didn't the police catch him on this? This is fraud, financial fraud. He had the right to add or remove anybody he wanted who was going to inherit his retirement fund if he died. So it wasn't like he would get rich. It was preventing her from getting the money. But anyone that would pursue charges for this is like forgery or financial fraud or whatever. Why wasn't that looked into? Sergeant Taylor wouldn't say. But it might have been his impulse to take her off if she had just walked out, left him, abandoned him. He might have like, well, I'll show you, So it's just an really odd situation that he could not produce a death certificate. So the trail went cold, and eventually the FBI, the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, a year after the disappearance, they had exhausted more than 200 leads. Ellie and Michelle decided that, okay, the police are going nowhere. Law enforcement is not able to really go anywhere. So they reached out to the media. And there's a lot of media out there. Voices for Justice podcast, hosted by Sarah Turney. Sarah Turney is a young woman whose sister disappeared. And that's a whole other story that's unbelievable. And she was so frustrated in her dealings with being stonewalled by her father, who's the individual, and being stonewalled by the police. They would only go so far. There was only so much they could do, blah, blah, blah. She needed to feel like she was doing something valuable. She started this podcast. She started being a voice for other families of victims, and she's done incredibly wonderful work. Anyway, she They went to her and talked about it on her podcast. And as a result, Dr. Phil, when he's not busy chasing down migrants, he got the story covered by Profiling Evil, a TV show. And it worked because they did get a lead. What did they find out? This is interesting. This is like an onion, many layers. They found out that on November of 2019, Jeff had bought a fixer-upper house near Ellie's University. She was going to school originally in Lawrence, Kansas, and he bought this fixer-upper for her to live in while she was in school. But she never moved in. So the police could not get a warrant because so many months had gone by. He purchased this house so many months after his wife had disappeared. So Ellie didn't move into the house, and one of the reasons she didn't move into the house is when she went there, she found a pile of dirt with black plastic under the dirt, marked by a cement block, and growing on top of it, Angela's favorite flowers. Freaked her out. So she confronted her father, and he said, oh, he just transplanted some bulbs from Angela's garden to honor her. So Dr. Phil got Ellie to collect soil samples. They collected 3 soil samples, and they presented them to cadaver dogs, and the cadaver dogs indicated human remains in all 3 samples. So based on that, the cops were able to get a warrant to search this house and yard. Wednesday, December 23rd, they went. They go in with forensic techs, and they did not have dogs at the time. And they couldn't find anything anywhere. They took samples. They got no response. Sergeant Taylor says he does not believe that there was ever a body there. So the police, they still drop by Jeff's house every now and then unannounced, kind of rude, but, you should never just drop by somebody's house without calling first, but, And they say that he is like a brick wall. Ellie and Michelle are keeping the case alive. Michelle has done all kinds of TikTok videos about it. And then enter our hero, Steve Ridge. Now, that's the private investigator that we had as a guest here. Such a nice man. And here's a good person for you. He told us that the job of being private investigator had been very good to him. And he wanted to give back. And so in the case of Jody Husentrut, he offered a reward money. And in this case, he also offered a reward money. I have it written down. I don't want to misspeak. I think it was $250,000, but I could be wrong. We'll get to it. So they were asked, what about if you did a wrongful death suit? I believe that that's a civil case. They decided that it was just too complicated and traumatic. There was so little evidence, and it would just, they didn't see the point. And the cops eventually got a new lead detective with fresh eyes. And if they were to prosecute this right now, it would be a no-body homicide case. And a lot of people think that that's terrible and hard to prove, but actually no-body cases have a higher rate of conviction than cases with a body, because they have to abide by a much higher standard of evidence because they have no body. It's actually more persuasive. So I write little comments to myself when I'm taking notes on this. I'm just laughing at myself. They're not just looking at Jeff. Ellie is not in contact with her father anymore. She left Kansas and she went to finish her education in Colorado. Okay, here's the amount. Steve Ridge offered to help, and he has offered a reward of $225,000. So a little background here. Let me see. what I've got going on here. Just a little background about Angela. I found this after I'd done all my research. I wanted to put a more personal face on her. She's really quite beautiful. She was born in northern China in 1968. Her parents were both college professors. In the 90s, when she was in her 20s, she was an aspiring news reporter. She met Jeff Green. He was a mechanic and a salesman, unbeknownst to her, 13 years older than what he had told her. She also didn't find out till she came to the United States that he had an ex-wife and a teenage daughter that apparently nobody knew about in Angela's family or, her extended family. So that's the background of Angela coming into the United States, and then we know the rest of the story. So that's the really disturbing story of Angela Green. And it's not disturbing because, it's gory or traumatic. It's disturbing because I think we're all pretty capable of drawing some conclusions here. I feel for her daughter. I admire her cousin, the daughter's cousin, the niece of Angela. Mad respect for Steve Ridge. Really interesting, complicated case. And we will pursue it more. I'm hoping, I don't want to speak out of school, but I'm pretty sure that Steve will come and talk about this because he's the one who suggested it. And I think that Deborah and I will probably do a deeper dive as well. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you found this as absolutely mind-boggling as I do. And thank you very much, and slanga foil, slancha.